Hello, everybody. The Jerusalem Press Club is proud to welcome 3 times Pulitzer Prize winner, columnist, and author Thomas Friedman of the New York Times. Hi, Tom.
Great to be with you and Uri and the Jerusalem Press Club.
Thank you very much for joining us. You know, we named this series of interviews, Journalism is Alive and Kicking. Is it really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer that Infosys, the Indian high-tech company, Jacob had a motto back in the early 2000s, and it was that you win in the turns. You win in the turns. And what they meant is big moments of technological change is when you can overtake your competitors. And I've always believed that in journalism as well, that hunt big game. These are the big moments, 9/11, 2008, 2020. These are the moments where you can really define yourself as a news organization and as a journalist. And I believe that some amazing journalism being done today in America, online and with more traditional organizations, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, etc. And there's just some amazing journalism happening. By the way, and now it's video, it's print, it's digital, it's quite a rich smorgasbord. And so I think it's a great time for journalism in general. It's a terrible time though for local journalism, which has really suffered. And I know there's been a problem in Israel as well. That's another challenge that we've got to overcome. But I'm fortunate to work for a healthy news organization and one that's, I think, doing great work right now.
But, you know, there's a sense that facts don't matter anymore and numbers don't count. It's only us versus them and them versus us. Is there any room for real journalism in between?
That's also a very good question. We have never faced the kind of threat we have with Donald Trump, where you have the president of the United States, whose deliberate strategy is to destroy the country's cognitive immunity. This is a concept coined by my friend Marina Gorbis at the Institute of the Future. Our cognitive immunity is our ability to navigate the world and understand the difference between science and science fiction, between truth and fact. And without when your cognitive immunity is destroyed, our ability to agree on and then act on a shared set of facts is destroyed as well. And so we face a huge challenge right now, unprecedented in our history, where the actual president of the United States and the media allied with him, the media ecosystem allied with him, is out to destroy the country's cognitive immunity. And so he can mainline his lies through social networks directly to his followers in the rest of the country and the world beyond.
So it used to be that, you know, the mainstream media could steer the conversation to the issues. That's no longer possible, is it?
I wouldn't say that. It's no longer possible the way it used to be when I started at the New York Times, and where the networks would sit down at 11 at night and see the front page of the New York Times come out, and that in many ways would set their agenda for the next day's news. We don't have that dominance anymore, but we haven't gone from that to zero either. Trust me, a big front page story in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or on CBS or NBC can still have a big impact on the news agenda.
I mean, do you have the ears and attention of the right wing at all?
Obviously, the country is more polarized than ever, and people living within two separate and some degree isolated ecosystems of news. There's no question about that. But when the New York Times and the Washington Post, sort of yin and yanged the story, for instance, of Trump's the whistleblower in Ukraine. That became the #1 story in the country. That led to a congressional investigation that triggered an impeachment. So I wouldn't exaggerate. We haven't been completely defenestrated. I mean, there's still a lot of power when these mainstream news organizations and new ones, Vox or BuzzFeed, when they get things right in a big way,
Mhm.
still have a huge impact.
Well, since we're in the opinion department, Barry Weiss, who resigned from the New York Times, said there was a civil war going on inside the New York Times. Is this true?
Well, I'm not going to get into the internal politics of the New York Times. That would take a all afternoon, and do that inside the New York Times. But there's clearly generational tensions and ideological tensions, overlapping to some degree separate, that are sharper than ever before. In the old days, those things tend to remain in-house, but now with social media, they go out of house, and it's a fact. It's a reality. And Jacob, running anything today, a newspaper, a television network, a company, is a fraught enterprise, because every one of your employees is walking around with a portable, it used to be an X-ray machine, it's now an MRI machine, okay? Mm-hmm. It's called a smartphone. And this MRI machine can see into very deep and fine tissue now. And if you turn it over, it actually turns into a global microphone where you can broadcast to the world exactly what you see. And in a world where people feel unrestrained to do that, trying to be a boss anywhere is more and more challenging, and none the least in the news business.
Right. Well, another note on this. Do you think the Cotton piece should have been published?
I'm just not going to get into that, because it's the kind of thing that requires 10 different layers of complexity and explanation. I will just tell you this as a general matter. I have a very, very high tolerance for running radically different voices, be they left or right, okay? When I was the New York Times correspondent in Israel and in Beirut, I would often actually interview officials. I'd have a real one-on-one interview with an official, but then I'd quote what they said on local radio. Why was that? Because I had a rule. What people tell you in English is not relevant. What matters is what they'll say in Hebrew and Arabic to their own people. That's what will usually 99% of the time shape what they say or do. And so I happen to trust our readers and their ability to sort out, good ideas from bad ideas. And I want to know the raw, I want my news tartare. I want to know the raw settler voice, the raw Hezbollah voice, the raw right-wing voice, or the raw left-wing voice. And I think the more we share those with our readers, the more informed they are and the better judgments they're able to make. That's where I come down.
In all of this, what we're describing here, where did we journalists go wrong, or news organizations?
Well, I'm rather old-fashioned, Jacob. I am on Twitter in that I use Twitter as a broadcast platform. I have over 900,000 Twitter followers, and okay. I don't tweet. I probably sent 5 tweets in my life. My secretary actually runs my Twitter handle, and I actually don't even know how to get on it. So I use it for broadcast of my column primarily, but also if I see a smart article, or a friend of mine has written a smart article, I will share that, help them, get attention for it. But there's one thing I don't do, and that is follow whatever you're saying about me on Twitter. God bless you. You can say whatever you like, but I didn't go into journalism to look over my shoulder. When I went into journalism, actually, when I became a columnist, Tom Wicker, famous New York Times columnist in the 60s, actually wrote me a postcard, and it had a very short message on it. Don't be afraid to be wrong, otherwise you'll never be right. So, I've taken chances. I've dived into empty pools. I've cracked my head. I've done all of those things, but I didn't go into journalism to look over my shoulder, to worry what was being said about me. I think being a columnist is not a friend growth industry. And if you want to be a columnist, you want a friend, get a dog. Don't get a column, okay? If you're going to do it right. And so I piss people off. I make some people happy, but I'm not spending my time looking over my shoulder.
Do you expect Trump to go after the media even harder now as the campaign progresses?
I expect Trump to do absolutely anything and everything to stay in power without any kind of restraint. I think he is a deeply disturbed person. And I think he is a man without any values, any appreciation of the Constitution. He's out entirely for himself and his power. And I think he is the most dangerous person politically on the world stage right now, because of what he is ready to do.
That includes not accepting the results or trying to delay the process?
Absolutely. I think there is a very high likelihood, I wouldn't put a number on it, that we will not have a free and fair, agreed upon election result come November for the first time. We could have a real constitutional crisis.
You have suggested, Tom, that there shouldn't be a presidential debate unless there was real-time fact-checking going on. It's not going to happen, you know.
I know that, but I actually made 2 points. I said Biden should demand that Trump disclose his tax returns, because he's literally debating Trump with one arm behind his back then. Biden has disclosed his tax returns. By the way, in the last few years, he's made $14–15 million, he and his wife, through books and speeches. That's the American way, okay, you know. But he's paid the taxes on it and disclosed that. And we still have a president who has not disclosed his taxes, who, there's only one thing we know about his taxes, and that is something his sons both told us in different ways before he was elected, that they have a huge amount of Russian investment. Well, that's a pretty interesting factoid, okay? The fact that they have a huge amount of Russian investment and his relationship with Vladimir Putin is unusual, to say the least. His unwillingness to believe what American intelligence agencies have been telling us about Putin, and his willingness to almost believe Putin over US intelligence agencies every time there's a dispute, latest being around Afghanistan, whether the Russians put out bounties on American soldiers. So this is not a small matter. This is not a trick issue. Why should I go into a debate with you where I've disclosed my tax returns and you haven't? Number one. And number two, we now know Donald Trump will literally say anything. He will tell any lie. He will engage in any fabrication. And imagine being in a debate with him, where this is a man who lies as he breathes. I mean, he literally lies as he breathes. So you have to spend all your time fact-checking him before you can even answer, you know, the question. And when you do that over 90 minutes, question after question, that is not, that can be very debilitating. And so I was not being cute when I put this out there. You know, we have conditions for debates all the time: the size of the podium, the distance of the podium, you know, how long the questions or answers could be. How about having a condition that you have to tell the truth? Is that such a crazy idea?
So what's going to happen? You know, where are we going to? What's going to be the end of it? Is America going into chaos?
Lanza, that's what I asked myself. You know, Jacob, I'm more worried about my country than I've ever been. I just celebrated my 67th birthday, and I've never been more worried.
Mazel
You know,
tov.
the night that Trump was elected, I'm a Wednesday columnist. So that means I have the first column. I've been for almost my entire 25-year career. It means I have the first column after every election, because they're all on Tuesday night. So that can be great, exciting sometimes, and other times harrowing. Now with Trump, you recall, so my first column kind of leaned that Hillary was going to win, but not clear. I wrote 3 columns that night. Second was that who knows, it's a toss-up. And third was that Trump won. So in the space of 3 hours, I wrote 3 columns on deadline. And, but they all ended with the same quote. It's a quote from my friend Leslie Goldwasser. She's a immigrant from Zimbabwe, grew up in the little Jewish community of Bulawayo, been living in America since the 70s, very, very close friend. And Leslie has said to me one day, you Americans kick around your country like it's a football. It's not a football. It's a Fabergé egg. You can drop it and you can break it. Be careful. You have to have grown up as Leslie did in a country that fell apart, or you have to have grown up as I did, where your defining journalistic experience, your first journalistic experience really, and defining one, as you lived inside a Lebanese civil war for almost 5 years, and you saw a country fall apart, you appreciate how thin is the line between civilization and chaos and disorder. When the Alzheimer and dementia sets in with me, Jacob, one of the last things that I'll remember, because it was one of the most powerful things I ever saw in my life, was a car driving backwards down, I believe it was Hamra Street in Jerusalem, at like 50 miles an hour, as Shiite militias were coming down from the mountains. I never forgot that. It was for me the sign of chaos in a civilized place.
You're talking about Beirut, right?
Oh, Beirut, yeah.
Yeah, you said Jerusalem mistakenly. Yeah, by the way, we share the same experience. I had the privilege of being in Beirut in 1982. I can relate to what you're talking about. Let me ask you about China, the rift between Trump and China. Is it real or is it all manufactured?
Oh no, it's real. I've just been on a Zoom call before this about China with one of my best China sources. This is really serious. The peace and the world has experienced during the last 40 years an era of relative, underline that 3 times, but relative peace and prosperity. Lots of people grew out of poverty. There were no major wars. There were wars and big wars in the Middle East, but I'm talking about great power conflicts. And a lot of that had to do with the U.S.-China relationship, the fact that we became, in some ways, one country, 2 systems. That relationship is breaking apart. It's breaking apart, I believe, because China overplayed its hand under Xi Jinping. It was greedy and was not a good partner in the end. And it's falling apart because America underperformed also. We have not, we need to be and should be in terms of investing in infrastructure and education and really being able to compete. And now we have a regime in America, Pompeo and Trump, who basically, these guys actually think they can do regime change in Iran and China at the same time. Well, you want to see a crazy world, you go for that. What have we learned about the Middle East the hard way over the last 20 years? One thing we've learned about the Arab Muslim world is that the opposite of autocracy there is not democracy, it's disorder. You want to see disorder, decapitate the Iranian regime and have a country of 80 million people, not Iraq or Syria, but a country of 80 million people have disorder. That's, and the other thing we know about China, and I always say this, I never like to use the term China, Jacob. Never, ever, ever. I much prefer 1/6 of humanity. You want to mess around with 1/6 of humanity, how they're governed? You want to unravel that? You want to see disorder? Unravel both those countries at the same time. That's what these people are doing. That's what they really want to do. People say that Pompeo and Trump don't know how to build alliances. That's absolutely not true. Look at the beautiful alliance they built between Iran and China.
Yeah. Tom, I'd like to bring in a couple of questions from JPC fellows, young journalists who participated in JPC programs. The first is Johanna Tism from the Toronto Star. Here she is.
I'm Johanna Chisholm. I'm a digital producer based in Toronto, working at the Toronto Star. I completed the JPC fellowship in the winter of 2019. My question for Mr. Friedman has to do with press freedom. We've seen in recent years the rise of strongmen leaders in places like Russia, Brazil, Cambodia, and even in the US, where public officials are clamping down on journalists like never before. What do you think the long-term implications will be on press freedom around the globe as we see perhaps more of these leaders take office? And what advice would you have for journalists covering the recession of these rights of the press?
A really good question. Thank you. I have to start with a lament, which is we were just talking about China. Jacob, I'm asking myself, have I seen my last China visa? Well, I've gone to China every year for the last 30 years. Will I be able to go back to China again? And even if I haven't seen my last China visa, do I want to go back to China? Who knows? Trump arrests some Chinese journalists in America while I'm in China. Do I get nabbed? I actually visited Iran in 1995 and 1997. I was banned for life after both visits, and but they kept letting me back. Haven't been back since. Wouldn't go now. Syria, Lebanon. Do I dare go there in an environment really controlled by Hezbollah where anyone can nab you? And so I feel so sorry for young journalists like you who, when I was starting out, I could basically go anywhere. Anywhere that you could get a visa to, you could go to. And now all these authoritarian governments, Egypt, really constricting press access, the ones that are in control, and the ones that are not in control, like a Syria or a Lebanon, can be really dangerous now, where there's kind of no order. And so what to do? That's just such an important question. And we're going to have to find different and much more creative ways to cover these societies. Fortunately, this is where social networks are our friend. To me, nothing replaces going. My motto as a journalist was always, if you don't go, you don't know. But if I can't go, but if I can tap into the social networks, the social media of people who are there, it's nowhere near as good as being a foreign correspondent on the ground, but that will be the alternative. And we're just going to have to find much more creative ways to cover these countries, and safe ways to go in and out, because I think there's just no replacing that. But I don't have a simple answer for it. I mean, I've watched my world just shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. I mean, you even saw Israel banning journalists on the basis of their BDS social network, statements. And frankly, I never thought I'd live to see that day, but I've lived to see that as well. And so I think we're just going to have to be, I don't want to be really say there's nothing to be done. I think we're just going to have to be much more creative, using lots of different digital tools to try to cover these places that so need covering, and to amplify the voices that need amplifying.
Let me bring now Colin Marston. He's a freelance journalist based in Italy.
Ciao a tutti. Hello, my name is Colin Marston. I'm a freelance journalist based in Milan, Italy. I was a member of the JPC cohort in the winter of 2018. I am most interested in reported pieces and long-form writing, and it's become an increasingly rare breed of journalism, especially when we're thinking about journalism that is international. There are so many newspapers and magazines that have stopped commissioning writers or having bureaus abroad. So my question to Mr. Friedman is that your career was started in the wire services, you worked your way through a bureau, and then you have the illustrious career you have today. And it seems like those same opportunities aren't there for younger journalists.
That's sadly true. When I was in Beirut in the summer of '82, staying at the Commodore Hotel, which was the press hotel, if I looked around the lobby, here's who I saw. I saw reporters from the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Boston Globe, the Miami Herald, the Dallas Morning News, Minneapolis paper, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, New York Times, US News and World Report, Newsweek, Time, ABC, NBC, CBS, DPA, UPI, AFP, I saw just an incredible rainbow of reporting opportunities, and all of them, to the questioner's point, doing short and long form journalism. Last time I was in the Commodore Hotel lobby, I looked around and I saw myself in the mirror. That's basically, our industry has shrunk, you know. I think if I were a young journalist today, what I'd be certainly focusing on is some of these new platforms that are coming up, like Substack, where you can kind of create your own newspaper. I see Andrew Sullivan's done that, left the New York Magazine to do that, and some others. And where you can, if you're good, you'll develop a following. I mean, sort of the downside of this is the long form opportunities in traditional mainstream newspapers are gone. The new form opportunities to kind of publish yourself or get your name out there in a world where when things are good, they will go viral. That has really exploded, and it's just a totally different model. I think the challenge is getting to merge the first two questions. It's getting the chance to be on the ground to do that long form journalism and then find a place to publish it. But for instance, I read Real Clear Politics and Real Clear World every day. And I'm reading long form journalism there that's being collated, coming from, wow, newspapers all over the world and websites all over the world. And all I can say is, if it's good, it tends to rise. And if it rises, it can go really global. So I don't want to suggest it's not as easy as having my editor call up and say, Tom, do a 2,000 word weekend review piece, and it's going to go all over the world. Those opportunities are more and more limited. But it's, I think there are opportunities. You just have to be, unfortunately, you have to hustle a lot more.
Yeah, embrace the change, as they say. Lastly, Talia Dekel from JPC.
Hi, my name is Talia Dekel. I'm the press director at the Jerusalem Press Club. My question for you today is as follows. Even support for President Trump among Republicans has declined. Do you believe that he will make a gesture in the near future towards Israel in order to improve his image among Jewish constituents on the right, given that annexation has been tabled?
Good question. And
I'll add to that, where is the big plan? Where is the plan of the century, deal of the century?
Yeah, I kind of think it's nowhere right now. It seems to have been swallowed by two things. One, the coronavirus resurgence in Israel, which makes Israel undertaking a highly controversial action that could be very costly in terms of its relations with the European Union, not to mention other countries, not to mention the Arab world, not to mention Palestinians. To be doing that at a time of rising COVID-19 cases in Israel, destabilizing the Israeli economy and vastly accelerating unemployment. I think the ridiculousness of that, has really brought the plan to a standstill. I think the other thing is that this was not my plan, not something I would have cooked up, not something I would have supported, but it did have one poison pill in, and that was that Israel could only really get its 30% that it wanted to annex if it acknowledged the right and the principle of a Palestinian state on the other 70%. And clearly that's been a problem for Netanyahu and his relations with the Israeli right. Not that he can't finesse it and find a way around it, and nothing would surprise me. This issue, I know it's top of mind in Israel. It's just not top of mind in America right now at all. I think the number of American Jews who will support Trump because they think he's pro-Israel is, that's already baked in. Whatever that percent is, what happens one way or another now at the margins with annexation or whether it goes ahead, I don't think is really going to change that very much. The one advice I give to Bibi Netanyahu is this. It's two words: George Floyd. Okay. On a street corner in Minneapolis, Chicago Avenue, a couple miles from where I was born. 4 cops basically killed a man with a knee on his neck. And it changed the world. You'll never see it coming. You'll never know, when that one thing you do is the one that absolutely ignites a forest fire. And at a time of rising social justice concerns in America, the Black Lives Matter thing is it's been an amazing revolution, in consciousness. And it's real that in the context of an incredible social justice movement in America, Israel chooses to take what will be described as a South Africa-like initiative of the West Bank of annexing territory and not extending equal rights to its Arab citizens. That's about the single stupidest, most immoral, and contrary to global trend thing I could possibly imagine. Israel's worst enemy, Iran, could not have designed a strategy or an idea that would isolate Israel more going into the future with the likely next American administration than that. That idea had to have been planned in Tehran.
Finally, Tom, how do you see life in the future post-pandemic?
Oh, wow, that's a big question, Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
Look, there's a whole set of binary relationships that are going to be erased by the pandemic. Think of the binary I grew up in. In the binary I grew up in, there was this period of my life called the education period, age 5 to 21. And then there was 40 years of work, basically. I think that binary between education and work, which was already beginning to break down, will be really accelerated by the pandemic. And you will now be in a world of work, learn, work, learn, work, learn, work, learn, basically your whole life. Online learning is really going to accelerate. You're going to see some new models emerge here. This idea of pods now, where maybe 7 families get together and hire a teacher for their kids. You're going to see a blending of what was homeschooling and traditional schooling start to emerge. The other binary was, there was a place I went every day called the New York Times office. And there was the place I'm sitting in now called my home. And this is going to rapidly accelerate the breakdown of that binary, where work and home, work and play are really the sharp lines between them will really be erased. That is an office building. That is a residence. That binary is going to change. I think you're going to see a lot of office buildings repurposed into residences. There's one good thing that's going to happen, Jacob, and one bad thing. The good thing is we are going to see innovation and creative destruction as a result of this pandemic, the likes of which we have not seen in a long time, because never had more people had access to distributed tools of innovation. Never have those tools been more cheap. Never has capital been more cheap, 0 interest rates, and never had all these people with these tools and all this money had access to high-powered computing through the cloud. And never have we had a bigger problem touching more things that require creative solutions. You put all that together, you are going to see an explosion of creative destruction in the coming few years. I think the likes of which we may have never seen in the world. But I emphasize both the creative side of that and the destructive side of that, because it will be destructive also. And so there'll be a lot of turmoil along with that.
Tom Friedman, I thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you, Jacob. Great to be with you and your team.